Hey, my relatives. This is Mark Charles. It is Monday, May 31st. It's Memorial Day 2021. And I want to do a live stream regarding the complex holiday commemorating Memorial Day that we have here in the United States. But I want to begin my time by taking 215 seconds to honor the 215 children who were found buried at Kamloops Indian Residential School in Canada. So I'm going to do that right now. Just give me a second to get set up to do that. But we're going to start by taking 215 seconds as a moment of silence for the 215 children found buried at Kamloops Indian Residential School. Please join me for this moment of silence. Thank you, my relatives, for joining me for that moment of silence for the 215 children who were found buried at the Kamloops Residential Indian School, boarding school in Canada. This discovery was made late last week. And I've taken the past several days to kind of ponder it and think through my thoughts on this. And I find this both infuriating as well as this is just who our nations are, right? This is who Canada is. This is who the United States is. This is what our history is about. This is what we've done, and this is what we continue to do. And if you even read some of my social media, you'll notice I've been tweeting that if you're shocked by this, it's because you're not paying attention, right? This isn't shocking. This is what our nations have done since its history. This is what happens when you claim to discover lands that are already inhabited. This is why we call those who live through the boarding school survivors, because there are many, many children who did not survive these boarding schools. Not only was it cultural genocide, in many places, in many instances, lives were taken. My grandparents were both boarding school survivors. I have other family and relatives who were boarding school survivors, and I'm sure there are people who are in my family who did not survive the boarding schools. And so to see news like this and to see this kind of come to the forefront, this is really challenging. And what makes it so challenging for our nation is, by and large, it has ignored Native American history. We don't acknowledge the fact that genocide was committed against Native peoples. We don't know what to do with that. And so we tend to ignore it, and we just move on and go on and think it's just, oh, we just discovered these lands. And then when something like this happens, our nations don't know how to respond, because we have this very clear evidence that, yeah, something horrific was happening. Something genocidal was taking place. And we're stunned. But it's not stunning, because when you look at the history, not the whitewashed history taught in our schools, but the real history of this country, this is absolutely what we do. And so I wanted to start this live stream by taking that time, 3 minutes and 35 seconds, to honor, to remember the 215 children who were found buried at the residential school in Canada, and the countless others who are buried in other boarding schools, some known and probably many, many, many unknown, throughout this horrific chapters of our nation's histories. Before I go any further, I just want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Piscataway. We now call this area Washington, D.C., but it's the Piscataway who are the original inhabitants of these lands. They're the ones who have been stewarding these lands for hundreds, even thousands of years. And I want to publicly state that they are still here. And I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands. And just, again, state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. Memorial Day, which is what our nation is doing today. We're commemorating Memorial Day, which is a day of remembering those who died in wars of this nation. And as we do with almost every national holiday, right, as a nation that has a bipartisan value and belief in its own exceptionalism, we look through our history and through our military conflicts and through our wars with these rose-colored glasses of like everything we did was fighting for freedom, and we were always promoting democracy and fighting for equality, and we were the good guys in every single conflict, right? This is the narrative of the United States of America. But that's absolutely not true. We were not the good guys in many, many, many of our wars. And yes, while we have lost numerous soldiers in all of these conflicts, many of these wars were completely unjust. One example I gave in a tweet I gave last night was the massacre at Wounded Knee. Right, 350 Dakota men, women, and children slaughtered in a single day by U.S. the U.S. military. And not only were they slaughtered, but our Congress awarded 20 Congressional Medals of Honor to the soldiers who participated in that massacre. These are the wars we're memorializing. This is included among the conflicts that we lost soldiers in. And this is what we're asking our nation to commemorate today. And while commemorating Memorial Day may be very easy for white people, it is really, really challenging, especially for Indigenous and for African American people, as well as for other communities of color throughout our country. It is a very difficult thing to do. And one of the reasons I'm doing this live stream today is because of these children whose bodies were found at this residential school in Canada. Because yes, this is a part of our jacked up history that we don't know how to acknowledge. And we'd like to go through days like Memorial Day and just talk about how great our wars were and how good it is that we won, and how we were, as President Biden said today, we're advancing democracy and fighting for equality. And a good number of those times that's a pure lie. When this nation was completing its manifest destiny and literally ethnically cleansing this continent, these wars were not just. They weren't. Part of the history of Memorial Day is it was started after the Civil War, which was one of the bloodiest of all conflicts that we fought in as a nation. And it was so bloody that we actually started national cemeteries afterwards. I was reading about the history of Memorial Day, and I just before I do that, I want to share a few stories about the residential schools. I'm just going to put them into the comments here. There's something from the CBC. I'm going to put another one from Native News Online, because I want you to hear these stories from Native writers as well as from the nation where these injustices took place. But when I was looking, I just did some very, very rough research into the history of Memorial Day, and on histories.com, I found some articles about the history of Memorial Day. And it started after the Civil War. It was originally known as Decoration Day, and it became a federal holiday in 1971. This article said it began following the Civil War, which ended in the spring of 1865 and claimed many more lives than any other conflict in U.S. history, and required the establishment of the country's first national cemeteries. In 1966, Waterloo, New York, was named the official birthplace of Memorial Day. They first celebrated Memorial Day there on May 5th in 1866. And they were chosen because it hosts an annual community-wide event during which businesses are closed and residents decorated the graves of soldiers with flowers and flags. However, some records show that one of the earliest Memorial Day commemorations was organized by a group of formerly enslaved people in Charleston, South Carolina, less than a month after the Confederacy surrendered in 1865. In this article, also on history.com, it talks about that commemoration. And it was said, in the late stages of the Civil War, the Confederate Army transformed a formerly posh country club into a makeshift prison for Union captives. More than 260 Union soldiers died from disease and exposure while being held in the racetrack's open-air infield. Their bodies were hastily buried in a mass grave behind the grandstands. When Charleston fell and Confederate troops evacuated the badly damaged city, those freed from enslavement remained. One of the first things those emancipated men and women did was to give the fallen Union soldiers a proper burial. They exhumed the mass grave and reinterred the bodies in a new cemetery with a tall whitewashed fence inscribed with the words "Martyrs of the Racecourse." And then on May 1st, 1865, this is 1 year before Waterloo, something even more extraordinary happened. This is from the article. According to two reports found in the New York Tribune and the Charleston Courier, a crowd of 10,000 people, mostly freed enslaved people with some white missionaries, they staged a parade around the racetrack. 3,000 black school children carried bouquets of flowers and sang John Brown's Body. Members of the famed 54th Massachusetts and other black Union regiments were in attendance and performed double-time marches. Black ministers recited verses from the Bible. But nevertheless, in 1966, the federal government declared Waterloo, New York, which has a majority white population, 94% according to the last sentence of white population. They declared Waterloo the official birthplace of Memorial Day. George Erasmus, one of the native elders from the lands that are known as Canada, he said that where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. If we want to build a community, we have to start by creating common memory. We don't have a common memory. We can't even acknowledge the black people who began our nation's commemoration of Memorial Day. Instead, we acknowledge a white town, Waterloo, New York, instead of the black, formerly enslaved people of Charleston, South Carolina. Well, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Right? If we're really going to have a common memory, we have to remember what was going on during the Civil War. Yes, it was a bloody war between the North and the South, but we also have to remember that during the war, in 1862, Abraham Lincoln signed two bills, one encouraging white settlement and the other that was to complete manifest destiny. And within almost immediately after signing those bills, with the removal of the Dakota and the hanging of the Dakota 38 from Minnesota, with the Sand Creek Massacre in Colorado, with the Long Walk in New Mexico and Arizona, and with the Bear River Massacre, which was in the corner of Utah, Idaho, and Wyoming. Abraham Lincoln was literally using the cover of the Civil War to begin the ethnic cleansing of the states of Minnesota, Colorado, Montana, and Idaho, and the territory of New Mexico to make way for the three primary routes of the Transcontinental Railway. Literally, massacre after massacre after massacre, beginning in 1863, going all the way until he was assassinated in 1865. These were some of the soldiers that had fallen during the Civil War. They were committing genocide. Our nation was using the conflict of the Civil War as cover to commit ethnic cleansing and genocide against Native peoples, against my own people, the Navajo people in the Southwest. So we cannot pretend that our nation fights for justice. We cannot pretend that our nation is always on the side of equality and liberty and freedom. That's not true. Yes, sometimes we are, but other times, many times, probably more frequently than we aren't, we are on the side of oppression and colonialism and are literally, we're committing genocide and ethnic cleansing. And when we acknowledge that, which we've never done as a nation, commemorating days like Memorial Day becomes incredibly complex. And the temptation is, right, let's demonize the soldiers. No, we have to call out our leaders. We have to call out our presidents, like Abraham Lincoln, who was one of the most white supremacist and genocidal presidents in our nation's history. We have to stop celebrating people like this. Death is horrible. Whether you've lost sons or daughters fighting in a war, or whether you've lost relatives butchered during ethnic cleansing, death is devastating. But we don't know how to acknowledge that as a nation. We commemorate our soldiers who lost their lives, but we don't commemorate or even acknowledge the oppression, the injustice, the massacres, the hundreds of thousands of people who died, who were slaughtered by United States military throughout our nation's history. We don't acknowledge those because that runs counter to our narrative of exceptionalism. And so I want you to sit in this tension today. I invite you to sit in this tension today. Yes, if you've lost loved ones, and even many Native peoples and African Americans have lost loved ones. We have high percentages of people from these communities who have fought in our wars. In fact, there were boarding school survivors from the Navajo Nation who literally came out of the boarding schools and enrolled in the military and then used the language that literally just weeks before, months before the government was trying to beat out of them, they used that very same language to develop a code which helped our nation win World War II. Many Native peoples are extremely patriotic and extremely proud of members of their family who fought and even died in the wars of this country. But we also have to acknowledge that there are many, probably even more, way more people who died at the hands of our nation's military. And that needs to be a part of our Memorial Day. We can't just paint our nation as the beacon of freedom and equality and democracy around the globe without acknowledging that so often, so frequently, our presence around the globe, as well as here on Turtle Island, has been one of oppression and colonization and even ethnic cleansing and genocide. We must learn how to create this common memory. We must learn how to deal with our history. We must learn how to acknowledge our past. That's the only way we're going to be able to move forward into a healthy future. Where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. Where communities to be formed, common memory must absolutely be created. I hope this adds some somber thoughts and emotions to your Memorial Day today. That is absolutely my intention. I am tired of my nation blindly celebrating its own exceptionalism and refusing to acknowledge the horrific pain and violence and oppression it's caused and enacted. And if we can't learn to do that, we're not going to be able to move forward. I hope that you appreciate these moments. I hope that you can find the ability to honestly reflect on these things. I hope that you can join me in the work I'm trying to do to create this common memory, so that for the very first time in our nation's history, we can have a healthy community across racial lines. My relatives, I appreciate you joining me for this time. I hope that your day goes well. I hope that you enjoy time with family and with friends. I'm excited and humbled today. Today is now 2 weeks since I received my second dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, and I'm officially vaccinated. And I'm deeply, deeply grateful for that. I'm also enormously humbled because as we hear reports daily of viruses, the virus just spiking in other places around the country, around the world, where people do not have access to the vaccine. And I call on President Biden, I call on our Congress to stop hoarding vaccines, to donate them, to give them, to help get the globe vaccinated. That's how you deal with a global pandemic. It's not just about vaccinating yourselves. We have to vaccinate the globe. We have to use some of our resources to make sure that those nations that do not have those resources are able to also get vaccinations. So I'm feeling very blessed, but also deeply, deeply humbled today. And it's that mix of emotion, right? That is what helps us to move forward. Just like Memorial Day. We have to wrestle with the tension. We can't just look one way or the other. We have to wrestle with the tension to create the common memory. That's a part of what it means to walk in beauty. That's a part of what it means to live in a diverse, pluralistic nation that acknowledges the humanity of every single person who lives here. Yeah, my relatives, walk in beauty. May we learn how to walk in beauty together. Hakone.